science should be something that transcends across all different parts of society, completely separate from any politics. And scientists need to participate and argue for science. We need to be careful to be individuals. We need to meet with the society as teams, because when you are an individual, you can easily become a victim of politicization. If you're one of a larger group, people start to recognize that you represent just the journey of science. There is nothing more in what you do.
This is the Nucleate podcast, the voice of the next generation of biotech leaders.
Welcome to the Nucleate podcast. My name is Sam Kessel, and on this episode, I speak to Mikael Dolsten, former Chief Scientific Officer of Pfizer. Over a 16-year tenure at Pfizer, Dr. Dolsten secured 36 medicine and vaccine approvals, and he advanced over 150 drug candidates to clinical trials. He previously led research at Wyeth, Boehringer Ingelheim, and AstraZeneca, among others. He currently serves on the boards of several companies, including Agilent Technologies and Rocket Pharmaceuticals, as well as serves on the private company boards for Immune AI, Fair Journey Biologics, Orbis Medicine, and Orogen Therapeutics. Michael's an advisor to Google Ventures, Bain, a senior advisor to Blackstone Life Sciences, and guides several other biotechs. Dr. Dolsten holds a PhD and MD from Lund University, where he is a visiting professor and has over 160 publications and patents.
Michael, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
What a privilege to be here with you, Sam. Look forward to our conversation.
So let's start easy. How would you explain what you do to a 5-year-old?
You know, I think it's important to start with something emotional, that I want to remove fear that these lovely days you have as a kid, playing outside with your parents, feeling good about your imagination and what you do. I want to make sure they become lifelong journey. And I'm here to understand the language of life, the genetic code, and how it can go wrong, and make sure we prevent that. And when things go wrong, we have medicines that make you continue to have the wonderful smile of a child on your face every day without fear of disease. That's what is really my mission.
That's a fantastic mission. So let's start with your background. What was it like growing up? What brought you to do your MD PhD at Lund University in Sweden?
You know, I was privileged. It was a great place. It's one of the oldest university in Europe. So you had access to study boundaryless. I started as a physician, and I liked the opportunity to learn about what make you vulnerable as a person, what are the illnesses that can struck us, and how do we diagnose and try to make a difference. At the same time, I was just fortunate to get pulled into research, so it ended up with a bit of a combined MD PhD, and it was just a lot of opportunities to learn near where I studied. I had an opportunity to get mentors that were at other great universities, so it was just a privilege to be able to do this in a place with a lot of resources and where my curiosity could blossom.
So you said something interesting just now, that you were pulled into research. Tell me more. How did that get started?
Well, when you start in medical school, you don't know much more than what you've seen on maybe TV series about ER physicians. I think I'm a bit of extrovert. I like to ask questions, and some of the professors asked me initially if I wanted to mentor, the classes coming after me. And as you got to know the faculty, they invited me to do a summer research project. And then it continued like, do I have an interest to do part of a laboratory and spend some time at breaks or at after service at the hospital. And I got fascinated about this translation between the patient environment and understanding cells, molecules, and how organs are composed. And that became really the start of getting into doing a mission-driven way of trying to have an impact on patient that's more than just providing what's available. It's about opening the window to future treatments.
Excellent. So you ended up doing the dual MD and PhD, spent a lot of time doing research, and then you ultimately pursued a career in industry. Was that the plan all along? How did that come about?
You know, in those days, and maybe in Europe, where the biotech industry wasn't as advanced, and the big corporation was seen as something that moved you away from, in those days, you know, having the noble purpose of making a difference as an individual. I would say that it's like often in my life, I speak about curiosity as an important driver. And I just happened to be in an environment where there were several Nordic big pharmaceutical companies that wanted to mix up their talent pools from traditional chemistry, biologists, and very few physicians to a more patient-centered research. And as part of such an outreach, I just made a move. And I think it was driven also about very early as a physician, I wrote papers about single patients I met and laboratory tests we did. And I felt that we could describe what we could not change the outcome beyond the medicines that were already standard of care. So whenever you saw patients with diseases that went beyond standard of care, you really had not much more to do than be an empathic physician. So getting to know that the industry was not just a colossal organization, it was full of people like me coming from a much more multidisciplinary environment. I started what became then more than 3 decades career and opened up opportunity to complete a new world.
So it sounds like there's a lot of frustration with the limitations of the medications and treatments that you had available, and you wanted to be part of the next generation of medicines. You wanted to make diseases treatable that were previously untreatable. I'm assuming that was also part of the reason why you pursued research as well.
Yeah, I think medicine really gave me that purpose of doing more than just having a profession and then a separate private life. And I had opportunity to meet children with very difficult cancer diseases as part of my training. And the fear in the patient's eye, in particular parents' eye, I should say, and the uncertainty you could see in the children's body language coming into this a bit strange technical environment of a hospital captured me emotionally. And like you asked your question, I wanted to see, could I really contribute more? What would be the science of the future that doesn't describe conditions, but the technology of the future that can really change the destination? And I was amazed how strong in those days the opportunity was to transit from academia to industry. It wasn't like today where it seems to be contentious relationship influenced by politics of this world. We were seen more as a continuum, and you could collaborate in a very simple manner with a purpose that we brought from academia, hypothesis around what drives diseases, and the industry provided tools that were testing those hypotheses. And when you were fortunate, the tools turned into drugs and solutions for the future. So it was just a journey that took its own direction. And I'm very grateful that I was born with a curiosity and surrounded by people that pulled you into new things.
So what was the pivot point? Was there a person? How did you get your first job in industry? How did you transition from academia to industry?
Yeah, I think often in your life, it's about seizing an opportunity. And I was working in our laboratories around understanding new ways to redirect the immune system, particularly against cancer. And it was just the early days of the industry in testing monoclonal antibodies. And they had just arrived as a new modality. So one of the more further in career physicians reached out to me and said, I'm engaged here from, in those days it was Pharmacia, to help really translate this new opportunity of cancer immunology. I can see your dedication, Mikael, and how you're really trying to build a bridge between hospital and academic labs. Why don't you build another bridge between those two and the industry? And we continued an extension of the work I did at a very limited experimental manner at the university, and started to really think about monoclonal antibodies, how you could arm them. We were way ahead of anyone else, we and others, when it comes what later, maybe a decade later, became the breakthroughs of modern immune oncology. So it was that sense of being an explorer, looking for a new continent of immune oncology. And unfortunately, the sharpness of the microscopes were not at the level yet of being able to understand all the cells and all the molecules. So we did good first waves that later opened up for many others. But it really showed to me the special thing of being a pioneer. But I also learned the lesson of when you're too early, you contribute, but you become not the person yourself that really, in the end, crossed the finish line of medication. So a kind of good early career learning, but also a little bit of disappointment that the technology were not ready to turn these immune activating monoclonal antibodies to premier medicines. This was around, end of 1980s and early 1990s.
Yeah, it sounds like you were way ahead of your time, really, in terms of modern immuno-oncology, checkpoint inhibitors, and even the next generation bispecifics have been revolutionary in helping cancer patients. I am curious, though. So what do you think happened, or was it just that the technology wasn't at the degree that it needed to be? Were there safety issues? What do you think prevented Pharmacia, where you were, from being that pioneer of getting those first medicines done? What happened, do you think?
It was an amazing experience how you can be so close to something so much ahead of time. Yes, one part of working with monoclonal antibody was that we were not skilled in those days to produce full-length antibodies that last in patients for maybe a month. We had learned initially how to make mouse antibodies look more human-like, but the technology had flaws for chronic administration of antibodies. So, and our ability to design antibodies with effector functions. We were working with a family of immune activating proteins such as interleukin-2, but what really is an interesting story, I published in those days a lot about what you call the B7 family that provide a second signal for the immune system. And 2 decades later, the closest homologue of B7 was called B781, later renamed as PD1. So I was just, you could say, a cousin away working on this family to have stumbled into 20 years earlier PD1 antagonist antibodies, which would have obviously saved patient lives so much earlier. And nowadays, I see a lot of companies trying to arm the immune system, going beyond removing the brake with the PD1, PDL1, stuff that we were trying in those days. So it's a fantastic renaissance. And again, be at the right time with the technology, and be very diligent in understanding when the technology should continue to evolve, and when which is often what's good for smaller biotech, to focus on a technology, but for the larger companies that want to scale up and move things into larger clinical studies, I think you really need to create that intense knowledge sharing between the existing technology, the engineering to make it really useful, and the willingness to have patience for a longer investment.
Yeah, because you all were clearly onto a, dozens of billions of dollars idea at least, right? So I guess it goes to show just getting ahead of the science is really important, and developing new insights and new potential applications. But those enabling technologies, the engineering piece you highlighted, is absolutely critical. And I like your idea of knowledge sharing in order to accelerate that development.
And Sam, I could just say how rewarding it was. I think it was 23, 24 at Pfizer when we registered a bifunctional antibody that triggered T cells to kill multiple myeloma cells, which was a kind of a new type of technology. We did it at the same time as Johnson & Johnson. But basically, it was the concept that I, in the early 1990s, worked on in a much less sophisticated but very similar way. And of course, we and others started to introduce antibody drug conjugates, ADCs, that now are the big new hope in cancer, these technologies. So it wasn't just we were close to one product, but it was really opening up the chapter of understanding how to redirect the immune system. So in a way, it feels very rewarding to be part of a science community where we all pushed the envelope during different time points. And now so many patients, millions of patients, are benefit, and so many lives are spared.
Well, it's really interesting to me because I didn't know that history around that original research on checkpoint inhibitors. And it's interesting that something like this was at least 30 years in the making. So really fascinating history, and just goes to show that even if something, fails or is too early, that it may work in the long run, even if a specific company isn't able to bring that specific technology to fruition. So you brought up Pfizer. You spent over 15 years there. It culminated with your experience as the chief scientific officer. You were responsible for managing 8,000 scientists globally. So just curious, what was that like? I'm sure that was a very high pressure job. Just curious, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, in a way, you could say that you need to learn how you continue to be a really good scientist, understand business, and how you can be an inspiring leader. When you organize groups of 100 people, 1,000 people, and then up to 10,000 during various phases of my career, in a way, it's a very similar type of recipe of, working with your team Where do we want to focus? How can we do things in somewhat unique way, not just replicate what everyone else is doing? How do we assess the value of these products for patients and for those that invest in our company? And how do we create a culture and a talent team that are really inspired what we do, but also disciplined? And I invested a lot in understanding leadership, understanding management, the financial part of what we do, and try to learn from colleagues that who are more on the finance side or more on the people side. And I think that investment, while maintaining strong closeness to the science, really helped me to feel that it wasn't for me a big difference when I work with 100,000 or 10,000. I was always blessed to surround myself with a team of maybe 10 different people, each taking responsibility for complementary domains of discipline, and each managing a component of a joint portfolio together. So that type of teamwork made me feel no burden of the number of people working there. What I did feel was that the day never ended. When you want to be close to the science and want to be out talking to scientists to listen about what makes them feel excited about the project, what do they worry about the lack of progress, you're out listening. And I found that so important for a leader. Never get yourself isolated up in a corporate headquarters. Move constantly between decision making at the headquarters and out where the real work was created. But that led, of course, to that the hours could be very long, from reading scientific papers, Nature, Science, Cell on the weekends, traveling to meet scientists, be part of scientific meetings, and back to headquarters. And in between all of that, when you are in a large company that have hundreds of different projects in clinical studies, maybe hundreds of approved products across the world, and you are responsible for how each of these things are performing, you can be certain when you go home to rest, you get a phone call about something happened to one of your projects. And it's really hard to hang up, because what builds an organization that is really, I would say, agile or dynamic is that you are there for each other and you're willing to listen even at the odd hours. So it was 15, 16 years of very demanding work, but also some of the most rewarding part of my life. But it's also fun now to transit into something where I feel I can be a bit of a mentor. I can be a guide, whether on board or as advisor to large and small companies. But I would never, ever in my life would have liked to miss this. It's kind of, I guess, being on call, whether you are a police, a fireman, a nurse, a physician. But when you leave, there is really not like something you can just hang up. It doesn't mean that I was a micromanager. I always encourage my team to feel empowered. It was just such a big role with so many projects, and lives of patients are at stake, and when things don't go as predicted, you want everyone to feel that this is managed with an utmost attention and that we always be there.
Sounds incredibly stressful, but also rewarding, like you said, to have the level of impact that you had on patients, the number of drugs that you were involved with developing, and even the ones that didn't necessarily make it to the clinic or make it into FDA approvals, you still were involved with cutting edge science, and you were attempting to do that multiple times. So the best of those ended up getting developed and ultimately launched and treating patients. So I'm sure that's incredibly rewarding. I thought it was something interesting that you said was that you had a balance being plugged in with headquarters and interfacing with senior leadership at Pfizer while mixing in making sure that you're involved throughout the organization. So getting involved, I'm sure, with the more junior teams and being on the ground and seeing what is actually happening on the day-to-day basis for the scientists. And I'm impressed you were still able to somehow keep up with your reading of Nature articles while doing all of that. So you're close to the science, but it sounds like a lot of management related activities as well, managing people, interfacing at different levels, and trying to keep tabs on the overall organization, which I'm sure did pull you in a lot of different directions at any given time.
And Sam, you said it so well, but I think when you become an administrator of innovation, of R&D, you are someone that keeps the light on. If you want to be someone that makes people feel, we can make the impossible possible, they need to feel that you understand what's happening. I didn't think that I had answers, but I always asked what I hoped would be the searching questions. And you don't ask them unless you prepare yourself well. You have fortunately high energy level. You can, spend a day out on your science site looking at maybe 100 posters. Another day you go and meet with regulatory people, late stage clinical, and you ask questions, and you're trying to build a culture where it's more important for leaders to ask questions and make others find the solutions than becoming a instructional hierarchical organization. And that didn't happen immediately. It took me time. I'll take the risk and show something to you that I feel very proud of. When I left Pfizer, I felt very special, and it has happened when I've left a few different jobs, in the special bond with the people that work with me. And, I tried to find something that brought joy into the everyday. And for me, it became to put on happy socks. I don't know if you're aware of these colorful socks.
I've seen them, yep.
Yeah. And they were actually invented in Sweden. When Sweden were trying to get the Olympics one year, they invented a happy socks. They lost the Olympics. They didn't become the host, but happy socks became a big product. So everyone knew that I was trying to use them to show that there is room for a little bit of joy and fun, but you need to be serious. You need to have your shirt on at the same time. And when I left, look here what my team did. Can you see this collection on the wall?
Yes, I can.
And now you can see the coded version. These are 36 drugs, and there were another 5 vaccines that we got approved together when I was with Pfizer. And look what my team colleagues did. They ordered socks in different colors, and they learned how to make with embroidery, the chemical structures, or the of small molecules, or the cryo-EM of an antibody. Vaccines were so complicated, so I got them on a separate glass figure. And there was such a sense of how much they cared about giving me kind of baton to continue the relay in a new role. And I just love that. And I'm a little bit childish. I tend to show people. So let's see if it fits for this podcast. But
it's all good. I love it.
Experience.
I love it. And it just goes to show too, like the point on culture that you mentioned, that everyone found a lot of meaning in the work that they did, and were really focused on, in addition to building a great team together, focusing on the patient at the end of the day. And I love that you found little ways to bring joy to the workplace, because like you were saying before, it's really intense, long hours. So you might as well have a little fun while you're at it.
Yeah, maybe the most important advice in scaling during your career early in my career, as we discussed, you run a team, it's 20, it's 100, it's 200. I think you can, in a way, be very much more involved in a lot of decisions as you walk the talk and you guide. And as you mature, you have to build a scale. And that's when you move from being involved in answers to being involved in setting guardrails where we agree to focus. But it's the questions, the inspiration that really drive success. And sometimes I noted people that, lost that ability to listen to the advice and stayed in telling others what to do. And that never works beyond a small group of academic or a small company. It doesn't work when you scale up. And to be honest, I don't think you build a generation of new scientists. You can do it initially when someone is new to help them, but you need to, in a way, build that learning organization where people take responsibilities, you empower them, you try to hold back the answers, let them find it, but you are showing the discipline by really turning around the stones, which are the data, by questions, and you create an organization that is rigorous, that is focused, and constantly learning and willing to make decisions.
That's phenomenal advice. That it's important to build a learning organization and encourage people to think critically and not always step in with your own answer. Let the team come to their own conclusions, ask good questions so they can come to their own conclusions. And it might be different than the answer you may have had. I would expect that happens a lot, where you think it's something in your head, but you coach the team and they come to a different conclusion, and that's okay. So you touched on it already. You've been involved with the development of over 150 drugs, many that went to late stage, dozens that went to late stage development. Are there any in particular that were highlights for you? And what were the challenges that you and the team had to overcome to address those?
Yeah, thinking back, in total, I were able to touch at various stages 50 approved drugs. Like the majority were, of course, during my last 16 years at Pfizer. I can remember moments that were very special. One such, it's a real great example. I was working for a different company early in my career. We were at the research review in Germany. We were looking at a drug that we thought should be involved in changing the vasculature and the matrix of tumors. It didn't seem to outperform so much current advanced drugs in development that were what you call VEGF angiogenesis inhibitors. And during that conversation, we started to say, what if that type of drug would play a better role in lungs where you get scar tissue, what you call lung fibrosis? And that drug became later a drug for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. I think the name is nintedanib, the chemical name. And it was one of the first, OFEV is the brand name, one of the first drugs for pulmonary fibrosis. And it just showed you have curiosity in the room, you have people willing to go the extra miles. And this story of induced serendipity stays with you for a lifetime. Now, when I look at my time at Pfizer, we had a number of cancer drugs that I feel very proud of, where we were part of the new precision era in oncology. We reshaped how you treat breast cancer by bringing the first cell cycle inhibitor, Ibrance, and then we created this paradigm of once you've found a powerful mechanism, develop improved generation that can bring therapeutic outcome maybe 7, 8, 10 years, even further. And we now built a whole portfolio of drugs in breast and similar in prostate cancer. The breast was almost all invented inside our walls. The prostate was the opposite. Companies we acquired and were able to unleash the value of the drugs from a biotech. So these were so much diseases that touches every man and woman of a larger family. Not every, sorry, every family that it touches, most frequent tumors of men and women. So we would all hear about the relative, or if we're unfortunate ourselves. And now the opportunity to have this type of targeted treatments have increased so much. I'll end with another example. We had a close partnership with Scripps Institute in California. And I got brought in from Scripps also advisors that traveled with me to review science. I heard about the company that had been spun out of Scripps. I got to know the professor, and they were working on how to stabilize amyloid that we have heard mostly about its role in Alzheimer, but there is amyloid that can cause harm to the heart or the nerves in your arms and legs. And we started to look at that amyloid stabilizer and started to realize that it may be involved in far more than initially assumed rare genetic forms. And we acquired that company, and we were able to persuade some of the key scientists to stay at Pfizer. And one of them, I remember so well, a woman scientist that symbolize that commitment of following a mechanism for 15 years in your life. And I always, when I came to Cambridge where she worked, did an extra walk around to hear about how her work was progressing. The drug became one of Pfizer's biggest selling drugs, Vyndaqel, for cardiomyopathy of amyloid type, not just genetic, but also with increasing age. And we paid, a pretty reasonable amount for a small biotech and turned it to one of the most important drugs for patients. So keep your eyes open. And I think an important part of this success was to bring the scientists to stay at Pfizer. And I was so proud when I was able to invite the key scientists to the board. They normally would not be coming to a board because they were really scientists active in the lab, not the kind of well-polished project leaders. And I said, this is what makes our company right now special. This person stuck with us, continued the hard work, and you need to listen to how we succeeded here. And these are the things that really touches you, how single individuals inspire their environment, and to be able to really give them that recognition.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that people are very personally invested, whether they themselves, like you mentioned, could be affected by a disease, they have a family member that, the scientist or the scientist you mentioned was extremely passionate, and in her case, willing to stick around for many years to follow the results of her work. So that's really inspiring. And I think that point is really true too, that a lot of the folks who are in biotech, whether they're scientists or other roles, that they are personally or have family members or friends who are affected by the diseases that they're trying to treat. And that's what inspires them. That's what gets them out of bed every morning. And like you mentioned earlier, probably working till very late in the night on something that's potential to have significant impact on the people in their lives that are affected by those diseases.
And Sam, I just want to say I would have not given proper recognition to our team if I also didn't mention, as I spoke about medicines here, that we have a fabulous, or I was part of this fabulous team in vaccines. And I worked with 3 different vaccines leaders that represent the different generation that we trained, all coming from the same legacy as they were working with me. We were able to bring 3 generations of pneumococcal vaccines that worldwide has been one of the most instrumental interventions in preventing deaths for young children or older adults. And then, of course, we got our fame working with the COVID vaccine and Paxlovid, really, in a way, saving the world. And I just didn't want to start there because we got so much recognition, but I didn't want to forget it because, there is a lesson here that never make science be misinterpreted as part of the political system. At the moment, vaccines are kind of underappreciated for some reason, although when you as a scientist look at the fact, it's one of the most effective healthcare interventions ever. Science should be something that transcends across all different parts of society, completely separate from any politics. And scientists need to participate and argue for science. We need to be careful to be individuals. We need to meet with the society as teams, because when you are an individual, you can easily become a victim of politicization. If you're one of a larger group, people start to recognize that you represent just the journey of science. There is nothing more in what you do.
Yeah, you're raising a really important point that, and I think this is really brought about during COVID, is that there's a very strong anti-vaccine movement. Mostly, not always, but mostly not based on facts, right? Based on speculation or based on misplaced beliefs. And it's really concerning, right? That you're seeing measles outbreaks, for example, in the US, which haven't been seen in many, many years, because this is something that had previously been fully, nearly eradicated. So there's definitely a movement against vaccines nowadays, and certainly can make things challenging when you're trying to prevent diseases, and especially for folks who are immunocompromised. So it's not just the people who don't get vaccinated that are affected, it's everyone who gets affected by decisions.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of learnings. When I'm thinking back, I think the medical community, and I were of course part of it, and had an opportunity to meet with White House and others. I think what really created this concern was more related to the mandate, that there is a mandate to close stores, there's a mandate to close schools, there's a mandate for everyone to vaccinate. And it was, in a way, often the same people that were involved in the mandate and were involved discussing with those of us that developed the vaccine. And it would have been much better to separate, discuss what you could say social intervention, different people discussing that, discussing, how you deal with other burden of society when you close down. So you got a more balanced discussion between infectious disease and psychological well-being in society. And then completely separately had groups that discussed vaccines and treatments. I think we, in a way, mixed everything, and the same individuals made statements here and there. And that's why I said what I learned is that avoid this kind of on the stage, big single person face. That's more for politics or maybe music industry. In science, you should take a step back and represent very well the area you're involved in. Invite others that do similar things and avoid that personification, because it takes a lot of risk that it comes back with unintended consequences. So I think we learned a lot. I'm absolutely convinced that it's not a bad dialogue to get all of these emotions up on the table, deal with them, and we will learn what did go not so good. And I'm sure we'll find in proper time a way to make sure that vaccines are used effectively. And as you said, the measles outbreaks is an example when the pendulum swings too much. So that's how I look upon things, and use a problem headwind to learn and create a new tailwind that move you forward.
I certainly hope that's the case moving forward. And I think the other important piece that you mentioned that I think is worthwhile for our audience to pick up on is that, you know, as medical doctors, I think you get a lot more training in communicating with the public. Although I think doctors and scientists have this bias, right? Because everyone's super educated, has spent tons of time, you know, diving into the science or in the medicine if you're a clinician. But it's critically important to be able to communicate your ideas at a level that are really well understood by everybody. Like I asked a question at the beginning is, how do you explain this to a 5-year-old? But realistically, how do you explain this to a lay person? Someone who has not spent the past, 10, 12, 15, 20 years immersed in science. How do you take yourself out of that environment that you've been in, communicating with scientists and PhDs and MDs all day? And how do you make sure that what you're communicating is going to be understood by someone who does not have that level of education? That seems to be a absolutely critical skill.
Yeah, I think also you listening to you use the word how do you, and it's important to interpret it you not as me, Mikael, but in this case, me, Mikael, representing a broader community of experts. Some may be at the company I work, some may be in the academic or hospital communities, in the biotech. Because when you stand in front of the public, unless you are there to ask specifically about a product that you represent an entity, but more broader, we need to avoid to feel that, that you are in the center and you are the rock star, and it becomes that loss of understanding how the broader context works. And that's really what good communication is about. Thinking how every person may listen to your words, but you do that by letting your words represent a broader community of voices, rather than getting fascinated about your own personality on the stage.
Absolutely. And yes, in that instance, I meant not just you, Michael, but you,
I know,
in the audience. It needs to be anyone who's doing their PhD, MD, has a science background. It's important to communicate the ideas you're working on effectively. So it might seem like it's too in depth, but it's definitely worthwhile to simplify and take yourself out. Listen to yourself recording on a video if you need to, if you're about to do a presentation, or honestly, if you're just practicing to talk to your friends and talk to your family members who might not necessarily have scientific backgrounds.
And I think that's a centerpiece. If you look at some of the contentious dialogues we have, not just in medicine, about education today, it's a lot about people feeling, I want to tell them what I think is right and wrong, rather than stepping back to say, wow, I'm here to represent a view in my expert area that brings in all the perspective from left to center to right, wherever it is education, medicine, engineering, space. And today there is an eager, and it's you see that among journalists, it's not just scientists, about teachers at universities that speak about they want to have the freedom to say what they want to say. But most people are more keen to learn about the broader picture than your individual view. And I think it seems to be a negative spiral in society where we have lost that ability to tell the broader story that makes us all move forward together in science, in education, in engineering, rather than get focused on a specific view.
I absolutely agree. And it's a really good point that whether it's science or other fields, that the communication piece is absolutely critical to make sure that everyone's moving in the same direction. So speaking of communicating your ideas to other stakeholders and going back a little bit to Paxlovid, which you touched on briefly, you were the CSO of Pfizer by the time the pandemic hit, and you mentioned the COVID vaccine as well as Paxlovid. But I'm particularly curious on Paxlovid, what that was like in terms of navigating public-private partnerships, navigating the internal teams at Pfizer, while the world probably felt on fire at the time, and Pfizer was still making many life-saving medicines and couldn't be fully remote. You weren't able to just shut down the labs or the clinics. Maybe clinical trials got paused, but just curious on what that experience was like being a key scientific leader at a major pharma during the end of the world, effectively, during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, on one hand, particularly in 2020, a lot of my time was occupied with developing the COVID vaccine, and a lot of our resources, and not just science resources, manufacturing, billions of dollars went to move this vaccine forward. And as you may remember, we used the resources of the company. We actually did not take taxpayers' money. We thought this is where a pharmaceutical company should do the right things. And in the middle of that, we felt that there should be more than a vaccine. There should be some opportunity for a simple tablet that anyone could take that would be easy to administrate. So we started, it's almost, to be honest, a similar story when you read about Woos and Steve Jobs developing the first Apple Macintosh in a garage, because all our resources went to the vaccine. So we found ourselves some resources that started to work on what later became Paxlovid. And I was fortunate. I worked with one expert in infectious disease, Lisa Anderson. She now leads the whole vaccine group, but she was an infectious disease expert. Charlotte Allerton, who was a senior chemist with her team. And then we had a very creative finance head, Cecile, that, I asked Cecile, we really don't have money to keep this alive or move it forward. I can't go to the CEO, Albert, and give him an even bigger headache about needing funds for Paxlovid when we are dealing so much with still taking risks with funds for the vaccine. And she said, Mikael, we'll find a way to solve it. And it was a little bit like our garage project, in the sense that it had resources that we were able to, in a scrappy way, bring together to a team. But it was the best, most disciplined people that put in the extra hours. And after some time, we noted, wow, this protease inhibitor, it seems so active, and we have found a way to design something that we think will give a really good dose in humans. And when we look at those type of doses and historically how protease inhibitors act to suppress viral replication, this looks like a real drug. And at that time point, having worked a little bit on our shoestring, but with some amazing quality people, I brought it back to the CEO, Albert, who I worked so closely with, and said, look what data we have now, but to take the next step, now we need to invest again. I could see his eyes open up, But at that time point, we had gotten the first readout of that the vaccine really seems to be working, and it's going to be one of the most world important medical products ever. So the company agreed to go all in on Paxlovid. We started to scale up production. We ran the clinical studies, and we saw a similar remarkable effect like with the vaccine. We prevented like 90% of infection. Here we reduced the risk for hospitalized outcomes or deaths by 90% almost. So two dramatic products. And of course, as some parts of the world were less eager to keep vaccinating, which you need to do with a virus that changes, but welcome Paxlovid a lot, I felt just such a tremendous pride and feeling good to everyone that worked together with me, to Albert, the CEO, and the company that allowed us to bring these two different products. So it was really something we did under a very short time period of a couple of years that, you normally don't do even in a lifetime in this industry.
That's incredible results too. The 90% reduction in the hospitalizations with Paxlovid is obviously huge and saved many, many lives. It's so interesting that it started with such a shoestring budget and really just an under-resourced project. I'm sure there were plenty of other things going on and there were reasons for that, but it's a really fascinating story that it really started, like you said, almost like in a garage.
Yeah, I used the garage term as a picture. Obviously, it was in our laboratories. It was just the amount of resources. We augmented them by computational tools, but normally we would have done this, at a even more well-resourced. But sometimes people find under difficult conditions a way of getting through. So please use the image of the garage in that sense. It was also for me personally a very tough period. My wife got in early 2020 infected by COVID. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital at Mount Sinai in New York and was really, really sick. So I got the kind of inside out experience of what the disease really can cause. And I lived on Manhattan during that period to be close to her. You couldn't visit her at the hospital. And, you could hear the ambulances come in the evenings around the night. You could see, the amount of people dying. There was almost nowhere to store all those dead bodies. And it was a very difficult period also personally. So that's why this outcome meant a lot for me, experienced disease. And thank God my wife came through through great care and other medications. And much later she recovered. It's doing well. Not everyone did, of course. So I feel really good to now be convinced that very few will need to have that concern, because now there is treatment and vaccines, and hopefully in many other diseases we can go at it in a similar manner.
I'm really glad to hear your wife is doing okay now. I'm sure that must have been terrifying going through that experience. And it goes to the point that we've talked about a couple times now, is that people are personally motivated by the conditions that they're trying to treat, and they're really trying to make a difference. You spent a lot of time during the COVID pandemic, obviously making incredibly important life-saving drugs. And you spent a whole, decades in the industry developing drugs. I'm curious, when you're thinking about founders, you're on the board of multiple companies and earlier stage companies. I'm curious what lessons from development in large pharmas like Pfizer and Boehringer and others, what lessons from big pharmas do you want to share with early stage founders?
I think the beauty of the large pharmaceutical companies, whether it's AstraZeneca, BI, Wyeth, and Pfizer that I worked with, is that you really are on a mission from the lab through the clinic and put the product as an approved treatment or intervention that's available at pharmacies or in your own medicine cabinet. So you think about what does the end product need to look like, and you walk almost backwards to understanding what do I need to accomplish early. And that holistic view on what quality looks like by design early on, what data you need at every step, that's something special you can gain in these larger companies. Of course, in the biotech environment, it's very vibrant, it's very creative. So it's not like one is better than the other. They just represent different aspects of the journey. The focus in time on a certain segment in biotech, the relay in a pharma of that you're running together, or a marathon race over many years. And I think that's really where I think founders of biotech can benefit from seeking advisors, mentors that have done different aspects, maybe some that have been a biotech CEO and know how this tremendous focus on one thing matters, but also the pharma people that are not the sprint people like the biotech, but more the marathon or running the relay, changing the baton across many years, because that allows you to think how you build in that quality that's needed, not just at the next milestone, but at the next and the next. And then the journey becomes much more continuous. It's also clear that, I was fortunate to learn in my career from a lot of great colleagues, mentors, and you always know you're better in some things than others. And you have to surround yourself with people that fill in the things that may be your weaker areas. And of course, my journey as a leader were over many decades. Sometimes you're thrown in to be a founder of a biotech company, maybe over a snap of a time. And some are just born with that natural leadership skills to grow. They are the explorers. They become those that document skillfully clinical studies. They understand what is required in the clinical, and they start to deal very skillfully with the investor community. But there are also many that are really good at the early phase and does not really do well in later stages. And some people really are skilled in seeing that founder's dilemma or founder syndrome, to really do where you may be the best in the world and stay in that type of biotech leader role, maybe hand over to someone else to lead in the next stage, and you move over to another area, another company that are at an earlier stage. So what I'm saying is, to founders, really figure out what is the thing that you're destined to do. And it's not better or more valuable to be the one that takes the company all the way to a multi-billion-dollar valuation, or to be the one that's a serial entrepreneur and moves to another company. But be honest to yourself, what are you good at? And then you really enjoy your time much more, and the company is doing much better. I've worked with both those types of individuals, it's different challenges to be a mentor or a board member to one versus the other, but they're also talented. It's just a matter for all of us to understand where we have the biggest impact.
Well, that makes sense, to find the thing that you're best at, whether it's being a permanent founder, like founding and developing companies to a certain stage and then letting that go, or sticking with it through the long haul. Just knowing what you're good at and what your vision is. I think that's great advice. So when it comes to interacting with these founders, you mentioned as a board member, as well as when you were as the CSO of Pfizer, what were you looking for in a founder? What do you think is most critically important for you, as either when you were still in pharma to engage with the founder, like you did with the company that spun out of Scripps that you mentioned earlier, or now like when you're deciding to become a board member, what are you looking for in terms of what the founders accomplish, how they're approaching things?
It's really three things that I try to look at. The first is the talent. Is this someone that have some unique skills and is really dedicated to this mission, has the resilience to face difficulties and hang in there? Is this someone that can create teams? Is it a true entrepreneur that see how science should translate into a company that can attract investment? Are they working on something with a really good technology and a product profile that has substance, that is solid, that can be pressure tested and come out and look great after every time you try and rigorously assess it? And the third piece, is this someone that would welcome advice, wants to ask the questions, and wants to grow? People that think that they know all the answers, they want to be the smartest in the room, they love to be on the stage on all the great meetings, are usually not easy to work with, and you have the biggest risk as a board member. And what I think is sad is that if you believe that you are having all those answers, there is no room to grow. If you rather take the view that you bring a lot to the table, but the best of you has more years to come, that's when you are more eager to listen and learn and be part of that culture. So these are the three things: unique talents that surround themselves with a team, the content of the technology and the product, the entrepreneurship, that's the envelope, that it can be a good business, attract funding, and that you have people willing to listen and take advice. Then it's a lot of fun to be an advisor and to be a board member or be a chairman. It's just amazing to be there. And particularly, I've been blessed to see tremendous success in my career. So my greatest privilege is to see others grow and experience the chances I had because people invested in me. So to be there and make others grow and feel that success, but you do it through these mutual dialogues, it's just extraordinary. So, but I've also learned that some people do not want to have advice. Some people believe they have the answers. And I'm trying then to decline joining those type of companies. It's not really good use of your own time, and the risk for big failures are substantial. So you really need to do your diligence. And it's easy to be excited about one or two things and you're in it. But I've learned, it's better to do the diligence and get to know the person, Don't just jump in to be a mentor, advisor, board member, chairman for a CEO that you met, that's a brilliant person, charismatic. Make sure you take a dinner together, talk to colleagues that worked with her or him, to what others that invested in the person were thinking. And then you will find very rewarding a second chapter in your career, rather than facing all the obstacles, all the hard, difficult conversations that doesn't seem to have a happy ending. And that's not really where you want to be.
That totally makes sense. And it's interesting. I think, the first two, good science, good culture, good management, I think those things are table stakes. The the humility, peace, and willingness to take advice. That's not something we hear all the time. So that's a really interesting nugget there that you just mentioned. And it sounds like you suss it out by spending time with that entrepreneur, getting to know them well before agreeing to go onto the board, get a sense of their personality and how willing are they to actually listen to and take your advice. I'm assuming they're getting a lot of advice from a lot of people and they have to, navigate that, but just trying to understand how headstrong are they, how willing are they to listen and adjust.
And when you work with companies that are in a more mature phase, it's a much more textbook type of conversations on whether it's the financial statements, what you call the P&L of the company, the pipeline, its diversity, its various catalysts, and the unique technology and the early science. When you work with companies that have 10, 20, 30 people, they usually jumped on something that they found fascinating. Then, of course, it's very delicate. You don't want to give them a playbook of describe to me where you play, how you win, what are your criteria, what are the time cycles, because that can obviously put a lid of the feeling of a dynamic rock and roll play. So you need to move carefully in putting your view and rather immerse yourself into this, you could say, science exploration that are the initial phase of a company. So you need to enjoy to, be doing the stuff that's important for the company. You need to be willing to reinvent yourself and be back in that type of curiosity and brainstorming, but you keep your playbook as the company grows to help them fill in those gaps. And it's not always that your playbook is good enough. And I heard you say that, Sam. You may point them to someone they should ask that have done this before.
Absolutely. So let's talk about one of the companies that you are on the board of, ImmuneAI, which uses AI across target discovery, preclinical and clinical development. Curious, what brought you there and what the company is trying to achieve in the long term.
So I'm on a handful of different companies that have AI for different purposes. I got intrigued during the last number of years at Pfizer how transformational AI will be on science. And it will have different impact over time. But in the end, some areas are more mature for AI to increase operational efficacy. It's easier to integrate it in drug design than in resolving complex biology. But we're making progress in each area. We just need to be careful in hype and overpromise and really use it where it can right now play its biggest role. So that's why I engaged, because I do believe that AI will transform probably science more than the decoding of the human genome. It may then be, in the last 100 years, the biggest change of science. But we just have to be careful to overinterpret how much it can do now and in every area. So with ImmuneAI, I was struck by their vision that the immune system is very complex, and we are just understanding the tip of the iceberg. We're looking at episodic periods of time. We take a sample and in a few number of patients. So the idea is to create such a large data set that you now can look at pattern from immune fingerprints to clinical outcomes in one single patient, where you sequence all the genes at RNA level in a single cell. And then you compare it to a big data center that is trained on a much larger cohort, and it can now see similarities and predict that this patient is going to have the following outcome of a disease. And these are the particular aspect of the immune fingerprint that suggest whether the treatment is going to be the right or wrong for this patient. So the key is to build up that larger training set and that allow an algorithm later for a separate individual to be able to see the same pattern that they are reproducible. So this is for precision medicine, understanding which patient receive what drug, understanding why patients stop responding or didn't respond, that can inform the next generation of drugs. But I also work with other companies. Chai Discovery is one that are using AI to understand how we go from a DNA sequence of a protein to a protein structure, which means that in the future we can look at the protein and say, what is a likely sequence of an antibody that will bind to this protein? It's still a lot of work to take the sequences available, add new ones, but you see a path where this initially supplement our existing technologies and over time becomes an acceleration and will maybe replace a lot of the traditional screens in laboratories. I work with other companies that are using AI to create a data set that suggests you where do you find the best drug for a certain target across all the thousands of companies in the world that may be working on it. That's Formation Bio, a company that uses AI to source for new drugs and to quickly predict how you should run a clinical study as fast as possible, because you have accumulated a very large set of experiences, how to design clinical studies, how to think about regulatory endpoints versus the clinical endpoints, and how to write those documents in hours instead of months. Two other companies, Orbis Medicine, Origin Therapeutics, are working on small molecules and are trying to create libraries that are billions of compounds large, what we call DNA encoded library, bring in those representing either small molecules of a certain type or larger macrocycle molecules that do different things to targets. And in each of those two, developing algorithms that allow you to understand how you quickly can find analogs that wouldn't normally come to your mind as a chemist, that would be the likely next generation of drugs when we first hit. But also here over time, instead of screening these billions of compounds, maybe we can go to far beyond trillions of virtual structures where we can see how they would interact with particular pockets of a target. And now we go from compounds that had a certain binding capacity, medium binders, to ultra potent binders. We made them physical, we quickly optimized them. So what I'm saying is that we can become more ambitious, do things faster, less resources, spending less per drug, meaning we can work on more projects. And I think we can fit in physical properties in compounds that's not within the blueprint today, how we can design compounds. But please, I tell everyone, under promise and over deliver. Don't sell things to be hype. That can be the downfall of commitment to invest in technologies. So you have to very delicately be part of this change. It is dramatic and exciting. And Immune AI was the first of this handful of AI-driven companies that I've joined. And all of the AI companies I'm part of do a little bit different when it comes to AI's contribution, which is the beauty of being able to see it interacts with either early, mid, late, operational or innovative creation of R&D and medicines of the future.
And that's really fascinating. All the different companies you're working with sound like they have some significant potential to change the way drugs are designed and developed and can accelerate the trajectory of R&D. The potential, like you said, is really substantial, but at the same time, for founders in AI-enabled biotech, it's also important to be very clear with people, what is the benefit of your technology? Be concrete about it. If you're confusing people with all of the hype, you need to take a step back and think about how you're communicating that effectively. What are you actually doing? Why is it important? How can you concretely impact drug development and accelerate things in a very specific way? So I think that's an interesting point that you mentioned. Try not to be overly hyped about it. Obviously, be excited about your vision, but be careful about how you communicate that. Is that...
You said it so well, Sam. And the final thing that comes to my mind is to say, clearly big companies, large pharmaceutical companies are incorporating a lot of AI in the very best way across the company. But the transformation, I believe, is not going to come inside out of a pharmaceutical company. It's going to come outside in by working with these companies, the type that I mentioned to you. I mean, there are in each category, obviously, several of them, because they have the people that are dedicated their career to certain algorithms, to certain facets of how, in this case, mathematics intersects with chemistry and biology. It's really the first time that you see this powerful interaction of mathematics with biology and chemistry. And this is not coming natural to large companies. That's why they benefit so much by looking outwards and bringing in them the focused, science-driven, mathematic-oriented companies as partners, rather than believing that you can transform overnight. We see that in so many different industries. Look at all the apps you can download on your Apple phone. Most of them are designed outside Apple. They provide a platform and a way for us in a user-friendly manner to interact. So it's very much similar that we need to think in the large companies. Otherwise, we become insular and isolated to the progress, and we become overrun by a new industry. That doesn't need to happen if you're open to this change and blending of what scale means versus entrepreneurship in smaller company can do.
So be willing to adopt and experiment with new technologies and find ways to collaborate at the end of the day.
Absolutely. The talents are complementary, but they are not the same talent. So you need to recognize, like we spoke, the new generation of entrepreneurs can learn the marathon of the large companies, how this will become a drug or not. The large companies need to realize that that type of entrepreneurship in a rapidly developing discipline like AI is going to be different inside the company. It's about embedding it, creating a culture that welcomes it, scale it, but they are not really going to invent the most powerful algorithms and its use. They have to open the windows and let that warm, wonderful, hot summer air get in.
Absolutely. So to wrap up, we're going to do a quick fire round. You ready? We're just going to answer with the first thing that comes to your mind, and we'll go from there. So first one, most played song on your playlist right now.
Wow, that's a good question. I am someone that listens a lot to Bruce Springsteen's
all right,
across all his years, and I even go to some of his concerts.
Amazing. Next place on your travel bucket list.
Well, I do enjoy going back a bit and collaborate with people in Scandinavia, where my career started, even though I'm a Swedish-American dual citizen. So it's kind of Sweden, Denmark, those areas. And then, of course, who can say no to a trip to Italy and France with all that amazing, good part of life?
And when you're traveling, window or aisle seat?
I'm a bit of a curious, impatient person, so I want to sit close to the corridor so I can go up and take a walk.
Excellent. Do you believe in ghosts?
I believe that ghosts represent a little bit a mirror of your inner spirituality. And, fear, ghosts that create fear is maybe the feelings you have internally when you see ghosts that you have been unable to deal with. But there are also ghost-like figures that can inspire you. So it's about finding a way to communicate with the spirit inside us. And, maybe it's a reflection of how little we still understand what is our soul and what is happening in our minds, and what's the difference between religion, science, what's different and what can be reunified. So in a way, if ghost is spirituality, I believe it's important to recognize it.
Of course. If you weren't in biotech, what would you be doing?
Oh, wow, that's such a difficult question, because it's been both my profession and my hobby. I do like that what you and I spoke about is a mix of art and science. If I would have been a talented musician, I would have loved to play in Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, but I was not a talented musician. And I firmly believe that you do much better if you find something that you're good at. So that gives you a little bit my sense of thinking.
I definitely agree. And what's one risk you're glad you took?
I think in my career, I made a number of moves, whether between companies, whether between Northern Europe. I worked in Germany, in England, and then came to United States. I really must say that I was grateful that my family, my wife and kids were part of welcoming or didn't contradict this journey. And I have to recognize that I was a little bit more inside my comfort zone. It was actually my wife, Katerina, that said, the life is too short not to try new things. Also, when it comes to living in different places. I'm so glad I got to experience the great things that you can meet in different places of the world. There are many things that are extraordinary in an entrepreneurial United States. There are things that are amazing in Europe or in Asia, Middle East. But having been given the opportunity to live at different places, that's really what I think I'm glad I tried it.
Fantastic. And then the last thing is, what's one book you'd recommend and why?
Two books that has been on my mind. One that's very recent, that's Super Agers by Eric Topol, that brings to a key to understanding longevity research by focusing on people that become 100 plus and trying to understand not just the genes but the environment. The other one was a book about Leonardo da Vinci that Walter Isaacson wrote, I think it's 7-8 years ago. That was such an amazing universal genius across all of art and science. So he didn't need to choose one profession. He could try it all. It's so fascinating to read about his life and how much he did, and try to just get inspired to constantly try and reinvent yourself and have his appetite for life.
I love that. And I love the theme that you mentioned, the connections between art and science, because there's more than you'd think.
It is. It's a significant nexus.
Fantastic. Well, Mikael, thank you so much for joining us on the Nucleate podcast.
Thank you, Sam and Nucleate, for doing these things. It allows you to reflect, and hopefully there are things I experienced others can use in their next chapters, in their journey. And I welcome them to share their learnings, whether from this podcast or other things that touches what you and I spoke about, Sam.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to the Nucleate podcast. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to keep up with future episodes. See you next time.